We like to think our bodies are honest. Bones break, muscles aches, nerves fire, and the pain tells us something is real. But what if that pain is lying? What if your body is faithfully sounding an alarm that no longer makes sense, responding to an injury that healed years ago, or to a threat that only feels dangerous because your brain says so? Today, we're exploring the strange intersection where the mind overrides the body, where trauma whispers through muscle tension, sickness, anxiety, or chronic pain. And sometimes where nothing at all is wrong, except the message your brain is stuck on. You'll hear stories of fake injuries with real agony, of minds rewiring pain, and how trauma, especially religious trauma, can hijack the nervous system, keeping us trapped in feedback loops we don't even realize we're in. Next on Almost Awakened.
Healing begins in the body, but awakening touches everything: relationships, purpose, identity, pleasure, and truth. Join Bill Reel and Teresa Hobbs as they explore the real work of becoming a healthier you. Welcome to Almost Awakened.
Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bill Reel. I've been spending the last decade or more delving into religious trauma and spiritual deconstruction. And this is my co-host,
Teresa Hobbs, and I am a Mindbody trauma recovery coach. I specialize in helping people who are coping with chronic health conditions that are brought on by trauma.
All right, today's conversation, folks, is going to evolve around the mind-body connection. There was a book that Teresa and I read this week. Teresa, you've read this book numerous times, but I read it for the first time this week, which was The Way Out by Alan Gordon. And he is one of the experts, if not the expert in this field, of helping people realize how their mind and body are reacting to traumas, incidents, whether it be like a car accident, whether it be some sort of life event that is now turned on symptoms in the body. And today we're going to talk about it, and we'll focus at least in one spot on religious trauma. But I want to start with a study that happened in the book, and it has to do with a social contagion. And it was juxtaposing the country of Lithuania, and I don't know if the other country was the United States, but it was, I assume so. And I'm going to go to the next slide here just to show this. And this was the BCMJ. This is a medical journal where doctors post peer-reviewed research. And there's this idea of what whiplash is a social disorder and how so. And what Alan Gordon said in the book and what it says in the study is that in America, where you get into a car accident and you get your neck jolted, you end up with whiplash, and that lasts a certain amount of time. It's some injury to your neck, and you go see a doctor, and they put you in the neck brace, and within a certain amount of time, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, it heals. It gets better. And but in America, it doesn't. People end up essentially suffering from neck injury issues for long periods of time, maybe the rest of their life. And if you go to Lithuania and you study the same problem, car accidents, neck injuries, whiplash, what you find is that people have the injury, see the doctor, and in the 3 to 6 weeks, it is healed and there is no long-standing issue. And so why would people get in car accidents in Lithuania and have a normal recovery time and no long-term medical issues with their neck or back after that accident, when in America, folks who have the same kinds of accidents have these long-term neck issues? And what the study points to, and it's so strange to hear it, you've known about this for a long time, but it was so strange to me to hear that people could have serious injuries that they should recover from, but because of our social awareness that these kinds of things last forever, because people have stories in their family or in their friendship or their coworkers, because we have a cultural expectation that there is the potential for a long-term issue, we end up actually having the long-term issue that's unnecessary because other countries demonstrate that there is no social contagion and they heal from this in a normal amount of time and never look back. No pun
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's interesting because, you know, uh, these things there should have been an acute injury end up being a chronic injury. And I love what you said about how, like, there's cultural conditioning, there's social contagion, there's contagion within families. So if we have expectations within our family, you can see in family systems, like, you know, if your father had back pain, then it's more likely that children are going to have back pain. Or if there's a parent that had a chronic condition, it's more likely that your children may have that same chronic condition. And yes, some of it may be related to genes, but also there is this sort of cultural conditioning that this is what's sort of expected. I think it even happens with people when when it comes to aging and stuff like that. It's like, oh, when I get to be this age, I'm going to have these aches and pains, or that's just what's expected. And there's this other book that's actually really cool called the Expectation Effect, and it does talk about how what we perceive or what we expect to happen can actually end up happening based on our perceptions and our environments and what we collectively believe in a culture. So I think it's fascinating. And this, like in Lithuania, they do not have chronic whiplash. It just doesn't exist. But in America, it does, and our doctors believe in it. Buy into it in our system, and we believe that it's something that can happen. And so it's a thing that we experience. So I think it's pretty fascinating.
yeah, and this was another paper that was done on the same thing. It's too small for us to sort of see, but it says patterns of acute whiplash associated disorder in Lithuanian population after road traffic accidents. And so, folks, you can look that up if you want to see that. I also want to show this one too. Let me see if I can put this up on the screen easy enough. There was a story that you shared in an early conversation that you and I had, I believe, on this podcast. It might have been the first one that you and I had. You had brought this to my attention too, but there was a gentleman who stepped on a nail. He stepped on it. It goes up through his boot. It's sticking up through the top of the boot, and he feels excruciating pain. True story too, excruciating pain. Goes into the hospital because he doesn't want to take his boot off. The nail's going through the bottom of the boot. It's going through the top of the boot, and so he wants to have it taken care of the right way. Goes into the hospital. And when they end up, cutting the nail, taking the boot off, what they end up finding is the nail never went through his foot at all. It went right between his toes. And he still, because he perceived that it went through the foot, he still experienced the pain of what it would have felt like. Like he literally felt what it would have felt like had the nail gone through his foot. And yet he had no injury whatsoever. This nail clearly did not scrape any skin. It did not cause any injury. It went right between the toes perfectly. It's another instance where the brain, it demonstrates that the brain is playing tricks on us sometimes if we have an expectation or if our subconscious makes a mistaken connection that it doesn't need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there was another one too. Let me grab the other one back up here. Luana, I don't know how to say her name, but Luana Koloka, a physician and researcher at the University of Maryland. I'm sorry, Luana, I pronounced your name horribly wrong. She's conducted a number of studies on this phenomenon. They typically go like this. She'll often hook up a study participant to an electroshock machine. For each strong, painful shock, she'll flash a red light on the screen. The participant is looking, she'll flash a red light on the screen that the participant is looking at. For mild shocks, she'll flash a green light. By the end of the experiment, when the participants see the green light, they feel less pain, even when the shocks are set to the highest setting. So this is kind of the opposite in some ways, but this is decreasing what is felt by indicating to the person in the study that they are being shocked to a lesser degree. So even though the shock is still the red color shock, which is more serious, by showing the green color after having built a pattern of the person trusting that it's going to turn out that way, the person actually feels the lesser shock when they're shown the green light. That to me is also crazy. Again, another example of how the brain plays games with us. You probably have seen the one, I should have had a picture for this. You've probably seen the one where they take a person, they sit them in a chair, they put a wood block wall so that their arm is on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put a fake hand a fake arm, so that you see this fake arm next to you and your brain starts to connect the dots that this is your arm. And then on your real arm and on your fake arm, they'll rub a feather on them at the same time. So you see your fake arm being feathered and you feel your real arm being feathered. And then they'll build up with maybe little tiny pokes of things or whatever. And then the next thing you know, the guy brings a hammer out and he hits the hand, and the person feels like they got hit with a hammer on their arm until he immediately pulls the board away. You see your real arm, and then you're like, oh, it didn't get hit. Brain can now rest at ease. But it's another insane example of how this connection's made. And I think I have one more. And I have two pictures for this. But they have actually it's not this. But they have a fake shock generator, similar to the other experiment, but kind of the opposite, where they have a fake shock machine, and by telling a person that they're going to be shocked and pushing buttons and the thing making a noise, people will feel shocks even though there's no shock occurring. So that's the same one.
Yeah.
And then go, please.
I just want to say, like, this is an example of conditioned responses and then predictive coding. And we've talked about that in some of our other podcasts, where the brain, it predicts what's going to happen based on history or based on expectations of what's normalized and what we expect to happen. And then, the brain turns on a pain response because it's trying to, respond appropriately. But in the case of I love the one about the arm and the feather and the hammer. I think that's just so fascinating. But it goes to illustrate that our brains aren't as simple as we think they are, and everybody's wired this way. So as we talk about, this information and have this conversation, I'm going to keep coming in and normalizing this is like, this is just how the human brain works. And this is how the human brain works in context of the environment that we now live in. Because, I think before this time period, when we didn't have quite as much stimulation and constant stress, we didn't have this many mistakes that the brain would make. We didn't have this much of a disconnect between our brain and reality. So I think that it's context driven, meaning that this phenomenon happens more so today than it would have back in, caveman days. But it's fascinating. So I just want people to understand how this ties into chronic stress, trauma, how that can, wire your brain to be more sensitized, and how you can kind of learn and understand how your physiology works, how your mind-body connection works. It's going to be really interesting. So let's keep going.
Yeah, and this plays into what we said last time about predictive coding. So we are programmed to not really live in the present moment, but any present moment is actually a prediction made by our brain 300 milliseconds ago about what this moment was going to be. And then the brain uses this moment to predict the next one, and so on and so forth. And so having your arm hit, again, your brain was predicting that this immense amount of pain was going to come, and it wasn't real. And we'll spend a lot of time today talking about the negative things that are felt. They are things that hamper your life from being able to be lived to its fullest. But there are also positive things too. And I'm going to put one of those up on the screen. It was the slide I had up here to begin with here. So this one here, I don't feel pain. You and I were talking about this morning. This was your concept. But if you and I lived in the Serengeti 10,000 years ago, and a predator animal began chasing us, and we're running as fast as we can, and we turn our ankle, we sprain our ankle. It normally would hurt like hell, but in that situation, the brain is going to make the effort to turn off your pain receptors, because your brain is getting the signal from other things that your brain is receiving about the moment that's happening, that this is a threat situation, your life is in danger. And this is one of those moments where generally pain is a tool that the mind and body use to tell us that we're injured so we don't injure ourselves worse. But by turning off the pain, you allow somebody to have the potential to get away from a situation by continuing to be able to operate at near maximum capacity.
Yeah, and the reason why that's important to know is because we often think like, "Oh, I've been injured, therefore anytime I'm injured and then I have a pain signal. That means anytime that there's pain, it means there's an injury." But the brain actually has the ability to turn on or turn off pain based on uh, its perception of danger. The pain signal or a lot of other symptoms, there's a lot of other symptoms that the brain can turn on that are all protective. And so if the brain deems that, if you're in a situation where you have physically injured yourself, but you are still in danger and it would serve you well, your survival depends on continuing to run or whatever. This happens also in combat where soldiers may have been, in the heat of battle, they're shot and wounded and they don't know until they get out of it. That's the brain's way of trying to ensure that you can survive that situation, because the first thing that really needs to happen is you need to get out of that danger event before you attend to your wound. So the brain is actually really intelligent in many ways, but there are also a lot of ways where it can sort of misfire. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all the ways that the brain kind of can glitch.
And I've got a perfect example of this. There was a moment where I was riding a motorcycle at 55 mile an hour. I got off the road into some gravel. There were signs up ahead. I was, if I stayed on the side of the road, and I was in a curve too. So I was trying to maintain going around a curve off the road in gravel. There were signs up ahead and I was afraid I was going to hit one of them. So I had to get the bike back onto the road no matter what the risk was. And so I took the bike back into the road. It slipped on the gravel before it got there. The bike went out from underneath me. I bounced down the road and I'm laying on my back. I've just crashed a motorcycle at 55 mile an hour. I'm on the road and I don't feel anything. And people come up to me and start tending to me. People stop their vehicles because there was traffic. They stop their vehicles. They come up to me and I'm like, no, guys, I'm fine. And they were like, no, you're not. You're not fine. I said, I'm good. I feel fine. Meanwhile, my head is lacerated. My ankle's broken. My ACL is torn. I've got road rash over my entire body. If I would have tried to have walked, I had a broken ankle. It would have been a broken ankle, but I didn't feel any pain. And even getting into the ambulance, it wasn't until I get to the hospital that I'm like, oh, I'm starting to feel things.
Yeah.
This was not a good injury. This is some serious stuff here that happened. And so to that point, like the brain really is trying to give us the ability to get through things and to endure things on both sides of that. Give us pain to protect us, take away our pain to protect us. But those signals do get mixed up. And the next section here that we're going to go into is that we have to tackle trauma. You've been saying a lot about this. We have to tackle trauma in the mind in spite of body symptoms. And so I want to go into the symptoms here for a moment. These are things, this is saying anxiety symptoms, but I think these apply to the things that would happen to us that would also cause anxiety or traumatize us or harm us. And so I thought this was a good image to to use, but racing heart, nausea, cold chills, headaches, shaking, knot in stomach, difficulty breathing, hot flash, night sweats, body pain, bloating, chronic fatigue, stabbing pains, burning, swaying feelings, trembling, numbness, ringing in the ears, chest pressure, crazy thoughts. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things here. Anything you want to say about the way in which our mind and body experiences anxiety, hypervigilance, symptoms of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I could recognize so many of these symptoms just in my own experience, also in so many of the experiences of my clients who often have a history of trauma when they come to see me. And, I think 40% of primary care visits are due to stress, are stress related or stress driven. I know so many people that have had, trauma or are really dealing with a lot of chronic stress that end up having panic attacks or all kinds of different physiological symptoms like this, right? And immediately what you're going to think is there's something wrong with me. What is going on? And so they'll end up in the emergency room and they will, be told that everything's fine, everything checked out, there's nothing wrong with them. And it's the most horrible feeling to have somebody label what you're experiencing as anxiety. And like, it is anxiety, it really is. And I remember people telling me that a lot in the early stages of my illness, and I just felt really dismissed. I didn't like it, but what I want to call it, instead of labeling it with as anxiety, is the term that people use now is called neuroplastic symptoms, and I think that's a better term. I think it's more. I think it explains it better, and I think there's less stigma around it because every single person has neuroplastic symptoms, and they do come from the neuroplastic symptoms are driven by chronic stress, having your having lived an experience of trauma or stress or pressure, or this need to sort of perform, or needing to be perfect or not feeling good enough. There's so many different ways that can put your brain on high alert, can put your brain into a state of hypervigilance. And when your brain is in that hypervigilant state, you are more likely to experience all of this stuff. And pain is among all of this. I don't know if they have pain on here, but pain is a big one. But I even had brain zaps when I was sick. And it was so terrifying because, why would you ever think that brain zaps, where you have like these weird glitches in your brain and it's like an electric shock, could not be connected to something really seriously wrong with you. But a lot of these are they feel very serious, but ultimately they are being driven by a brain that's just feeling overwhelmed, that's feeling really unsafe and feels like it's in constant danger.
Yeah, and you'll see in the next slide that I moved to that term neuroplasticity, but I want
Mm,
to say here, and there may be other categories, but as I was trying to think about causes of symptoms, three facets came to mind. So there's the first one. Some symptoms that we experience are due to a physical cause. And my motorcycle accident is an example of that.
yes.
I've got a broken ankle, and the only way that that broken ankle can be resolved is to go in and see a doctor and have them perform a medical procedure to repair that broken ankle. Some of the symptoms we have are due to a physical cause, and that physical cause uh, has done something to our body that it is not repairable without some assistance uh, by a medical professional. Surgery for a broken arm, or something like that. The other one, and there's two others, but the other one that I want to say next is some symptoms are due to a physical incident or cause, but one which must be overcome by working with the mind. And you shared an example the other day of, I think it was from Alan Gordon's book, but there was a lady who had some spine issues, and when they actually did the X-rays, they could see that her spine was in a weird shape. It was like in the shape of an S.
Mhm.
So if you were facing somebody front or back, and their spine just had this really irregular curve to it, and that person experienced back pain. And so they associated the physical issues of the spine with the symptoms of the back pain. And yet that person was able to go do mind body work. And if the spine really was the cause of the back pain, he was able to get help that separated that spine issue from her feeling the pain sensations of it.
Yes. She was actually part of the Boulder back pain study, and they, she had scoliosis, and it was that S shape in her spine. And a lot of people with scoliosis can have severe pain, but some people with scoliosis have no pain at all. There's actually a lot of irregularities that you can have in your spine that are not correlated with pain, which I think is really fascinating. But she joined the Boulder back pain study, and she was one of the people who resolved her pain. And just by working doing this pain reprocessing therapy concept, which we'll kind of talk more about. But yeah, it's fascinating. So even if you have a structural issue, there's like what I think you're speaking to is that there's sometimes you can have a structural issue and you can still resolve your pain. Sometimes you have a structural issue and you need support by a doctor, you need medication, you need whatever it is. And other times it's something that's supportable through this mind body process.
Yeah, and then there's this third one where the symptoms are due to a mind cause. And this might be many, maybe even most instances where whatever it is you're experiencing, there is no discoverable physical cause of that. And the way to tackle that might be, and may often be, uh, through working with the mind to get into your head in terms of dealing with the signals that are causing it. And so I'm only saying, like, you can have a broken ankle and it needs to be fixed by surgery. You can have back pain associated with some incident in your life and that be real. And yet maybe the only way to distance yourself from the pain is to attack it as a psychological issue. That even if the accident happened and the pain is connected to that, that you might be able, through this kind of work, to separate the pain from what caused it. In other words, yes, my back hurts, but I can tell my brain to turn that off. And then there are instances which don't have any physical cause. Your brain just has some mixed up signal. You're experiencing these symptoms, and they can be all kinds of symptoms. We're using pain a lot here in the early part of the conversation, but we'll get into them later. There's lots of things: anxiety, pain, fear, intrusive thoughts, sickness, all kinds of stuff. But that it may not have a cause. You may have a mixed up signal, and that also is going to have to be tackled as a psychological exercise.
Yeah. And going back to the example you had of, sometimes you have a physiological condition, like maybe you had an injury, but the injury healed and you had pain while you had the acute part of the injury, but the pain remained after the injury healed, but the brain didn't get the signal, right? Because
Like
so that can happen.
Like the Lithuania
Yes.
a Whiplash study.
Whiplash.
Yep.
Chronic whiplash is where, your brain basically didn't get the message that the situation had healed itself. So, and that's just part of you get stuck in a symptom cycle.
Yep.
And so, yeah. And then there are other things where your brain just makes a mistake and thinks that there is something wrong in the body when there isn't, and ends up turning on a different symptom as a way to try to get your attention to something it feels is a threat in your body.
Yep. And so now I'll jump into some of this neuroplasticity. So repetition builds patterns. Neuroplasticity 101. The more often a neural pathway is activated, the more efficient and automatic it becomes. Think about brushing your teeth or driving home or flinching when you hear a loud bang. It's the context of chronic pain. I'm sorry, in the context of chronic pain, if the brain repeatedly receives signals that something is dangerous, even if it isn't, it builds a pain protection pattern. Over time, the brain lowers the threshold for firing that pattern, meaning smaller and smaller triggers like bending over or anxiety can now cause the pain response. Alan Gordon uses this to explain how neuroplastic pain becomes chronic. The brain is stuck in a faulty loop, confusing safe stimuli with danger. And I just note here, healing requires disrupting that repetition and replacing it with new, safer signals. And that's going to become important when we get to the end, as we talk about what it takes to deal with the symptoms of trauma, including religious and spiritual trauma. So,
Yeah. And one thing I just want to say, we'll talk about this more, I think, in other slides, but when you have had trauma, and trauma brings up a lot of emotions, and emotions are actually felt in the body as sensation. An emotion is a sensation in the body, and a lot of us don't have we've never been taught how emotions show up or how to work with them. And so if you have an emotion in your body and it's just sort of a background emotion, and and there's a signal that's coming up like a background sensation, your brain can tag that as a threat and turn on a danger signal or a response, turn on a symptom or a pain signal in response to that perceived um, background signal of an emotion, which is why it's relevant to, trauma and stuff like that, because there's such an emotional aspect to the trauma we experience.
all right. So now, what we've got here: skills versus neuroplastic pain. And so this is where Alan Gordon gets prescriptive, not just descriptive. The battle isn't tissue versus pain, it's skills versus neural loops. He's framing healing not as a passive outcome, waiting for pain to go away, but as an active skill set that anyone can learn. And the suggestion here is to think of it this way: somatic tracking, the skill of observing pain with curiosity instead of fear, to retrain the brain that the signal isn't dangerous. And this is something that you do with your clients all the time. Reappraisal, changing your thoughts about the pain from I'm broken to my brain is misfiring. It's another thing I've heard you do with clients. Evidence gathering, teaching the brain it's safe by testing movements, noticing contradictions. Example, it hurts when I stand, but not when I sit. So it's probably not structural. Desensitization through safety. I'm sorry. Using consistent repeated safety signals to form new neural pathways. Again, repetition, but this time intentionally aimed at healing. Just as these symptoms were learned through repetition, it can be unlearned through intentional repetition of specific skills. Anything you want to say about that one?
This is what I do all day long. So,
Yeah.
yeah, this is how we sort of unwind the patterns of the symptom cycle and the symptom patterns is, using these different tools and being able to shift your brain from perceiving something as dangerous to being able to understand that it's actually safe. And a huge part of that, the biggest part of all this work is, and it's the reason why we're talking about all the ways that your brain actually works, is when you understand that it's possible that your symptom or your pain is actually being driven not by something structural, but by just a glitch in your brain, you can unwind the fear around the symptom. It can let go. Like some people, just learning that is enough for their brain to turn off the signals. They can alleviate symptoms and alleviate pain just by understanding like how it works. So the psychoeducation piece of this is really, really important. And then there are various different tools that you can use to sort of retrain your brain, as you feel into your body. That's what somatic tracking is. You sense into the body and you track where the sensation of pain or where the symptom is at in your body, and you see it through a new lens. So instead of tracking it and being like, "Oh, there's pain, pain, pain," and you're labeling it, is there something wrong? Even if it's unconscious, even if unconsciously your brain keeps recognizing that as something broken in your body or a structural issue, when you go into your body from this place of non-judgment where you're like, I'm not going to label it as anything, I'm just going to be curious about it. I'm going to sense into what it feels like. Okay, maybe it's a sharp sensation, or wow, it's kind of diffuse, it feels kind of like a floaty cloud, or wow, now it's shifting and moving. And just the act of doing that and following and tracking those sensations is what sort of interrupts that pattern, and it sends a message back to the brain that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing dangerous, because now you're open and you're just curious and you're watching it as if it's not dangerous, it's just something interesting. And it's fascinating how powerful that tool is. I love Alan Gordon's work so much.
Yeah, I think folks are really going to enjoy this next one. We'll see how this goes. I wanted to just play for a moment with this idea of how our brain misinterprets safe signals because of what's happened before. So I'm going to take that and put this up on the screen. Whoop, right here. And I'll just note what happened. I mean, the audience will all feel this, right? What happens when you're driving down the road, you look into your side mirror, your rearview mirror, and you see there's a police car behind you.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't, now this guy's got lights on, but it doesn't matter. If let's say his lights are off and it's just a police officer out driving. He's not pulling you over. He's just behind you. The moment we see a police car in our mirror, what do we feel? We get kind of clenched up. Our breathing changes. We can feel that sort of buzz of
Mhm.
anxiety.
Dread.
And it doesn't, unless he's pulling you over and unless you did something wrong, it means nothing. It's just a cop car that happens to be behind you. We all feel this kind of thing. And so I just wanted to note that. And there are several places in this conversation where Alan Gordon and others use the word fear. I'll just note you prefer the word hypervigilance. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes. I have a lot of people, and this was me too, I was told over and over and over again, like, "Oh, it's just fear, it's just fear." And that made me feel, I don't know, there was something about it that made me feel away, and a lot of people feel really resistant to that. And while, fear can be a good word for some people, ultimately it really is hypervigilance. It's the brain that is in such a state of wanting to protect you because it's had enough experiences in the past where things didn't go well, or it needed to stay on high alert in order to keep you safe, whether that was emotionally, whether that was physically, whether that was, relationally, whatever that is. And so it is a hypervigilance. It's a brain that then became sort of hijacked to make sure it was never going to make a mistake again. It was never going to put itself, let itself be vulnerable, and it was going to make sure it's always looking out for, its overall survival. So it's really, yeah, that to me just explains it better, and it bypasses anybody who may have some reactivity about the word fear. And also a lot of people who come to me with, a lot of chronic conditions, whether it's chronic pain or other kinds of strange and weird, crazy symptoms. I call them invisible symptoms because sometimes you can't see that a person's suffering, but they're debilitating, these symptoms that people go through. And so when somebody comes to me, a lot of times these are people who have tried everything to heal, and they aren't consciously obsessing about their symptoms. They're not the type of people who are consciously practicing it. Sometimes these symptoms get turned on unconsciously. And so again, there's a stigma around like, oh, it's all in your head. You're just creating this. This is your fault for not being stronger, or whatever it is, or oh, you're just afraid. I don't like that. I think that can be really stigmatizing. And so for me, yeah, it's definitely hypervigilance. That's what the brain is doing. So
Yeah. Yeah. In every one of us in our past, we've had things happen to us. Um, I'm pausing only because it's a book that I read. What happened to you? And it's by
mm,
Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. And I think the book is phenomenal. And it's this idea that rather than go, why did you do that? Why do you do the things you do? Why do you show up the way you show up? Why are you uh, uh, causing trouble at work? Why are you not doing well in school? Instead, the question that should be asked, at least in the front end of the conversation, is what happened to you? And as you're pointing out, this is a lot to do with the elevated responses that we have to threats. And uh, moments in my past, I had an incident happen in first grade that for the rest of my life up until this moment, in any moment that has the same risk of feeling the things that were felt in that incident in first grade, I feel elevated responses to a perceived threat.
yep.
uh, whether it's around emotions of shame or embarrassment or fear or, as you put it, hypervigilance. um, our body and brain are constantly surveying the environment. You've talked about this. And when there is a perceived threat, real or not,
Yeah.
our body and brain are reacting based on what they connect it to that's happened before. What is our life experience? And this gets really tricky. We'll get into religious trauma in a moment, but religious trauma tends to be these actions that happen over and over and over again, that impact how we and our mind and body perceive reality. So I just want to say here, uh, negative actions like criticism can
Mm.
activate our, it says here fear responses, but I'll say hypervigilant responses. Negative symptoms in mind body after positive big life changes. So here's a big one. I'll change the slide. You were saying the other day that even major positive life changes, a promotion at work, you bought a new home that you're excited about, the birth of a child that has been anticipated and welcomed, improved health, financial gain, educational achievement, positive career change. Even when positive things happen, because they are drastic shifts in our world, they can actually lead to symptoms that are debilitating or are taking away from us living our best life. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah. So, they can be, quote, unquote, "the trigger." Whenever I'm sitting down with a client, I will go over, when was the onset of the symptom? When did it come on? And I'm looking for things that are any kind of changes. And in some cases, it's because, oh, it was, I got married, or I bought a new house, or, something that seemed like it was gonna be something positive ended up being, putting that person through a lot of pressure or stress. And the other thing that this can happen with, it's relevant to the people that watch this podcast, is leaving leaving a religion, leaving your church, going through the process of deconstruction. And for some people, that can be when their symptoms show up. For other people, their symptoms were going on all along while they were in the religion, and when they left, then sometimes their symptoms get better. For other people, they can have symptoms before and then leave the religion, and their symptoms get worse as well. So it's there's just different things that will sort of sometimes just trigger your system, because either you're going into something that's what's the word? We don't like the unknown, right? So something that's new or unknown can shift your system into a state of hypervigilance, because now it's this new thing that you have to kind of try and get used to. So, those are some of the ways that can show up, or some of the reasons why positive changes can trigger new symptoms.
And this makes sense. Again, we go back 10,000 years ago, and if you are living in a tribal system, again, on the Serengeti, wherever, I like that word. So, if you had an instance where something drastically changed, you and your tribe are going along day to day, living your life a certain way, and suddenly it shifts or changes, the brain wants to start with looking for the negative, the threat, what it should be afraid of, over top of like, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this great? So even though your conscious mind goes, I just got married and this partner is incredible, your brain is trained over thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years to look for the negative before it worries about celebrating the positive.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Again, back to your Serengeti example. If you are, say you're a tribal and you're suddenly moving territory. Did you already say this? I hope I didn't. I'm not talking over what you just said. But if you're moving into new territory and it's an unknown area, you are going to be alert to, like, okay, what animals live here? What are the dangers that I need to be aware of? So you're going to be more hypervigilant in those situations. And that's probably how that guy got wired into us, which is
Yeah.
actually, because I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And so now we'll jump into talking a little bit about religious trauma. And I thought this was neat. This was something I learned today. I've always put these into the same boat, and maybe this isn't accurate, but this was at least one entity's way of trying to discern the difference. Spiritual abuse is what happens in a one-on-one relationship where one person manipulates the other using religion. So you might have a fairly healthy religious system, but you have one leader who's using authority to enact really inappropriate or unhealthy interactions or abusive interactions. And so they want to call that spiritual abuse. Now, the trouble I have with this here is that not all religious trauma occurs within a religion. It can occur within other kinds of social systems. You could have a yoga group. You could have a meditation group that would have unhealthy, abusive aspects to it. And so you wouldn't want to call it religious trauma. But spiritual abuse, that makes sense to me. You have one person acting outside of the bounds of what the system is, and they're enacting harm. Religious trauma is exposure to a religion, culture, and community that negatively affects a person over time. Main causes of religious trauma, I just want to note here: strict moral codes, suppression of critical thinking, inequality of power dynamics, and fear-based teaching. And there were things that I thought of that I made notes of. Your reality is, so again, we're talking about what does religion or spiritual systems do to us, and then what does that cause in terms of the symptoms, the affects that we have from that thing that happened to us. And so I thought about our reality being sabotaged. So we use the word gaslighting. If we grow up in a religious system that is constantly moving the goalpost, constantly reinterpreting things, constantly reframing things, and articulating it in such a way as to say, oh, you should have known that. You should have seen that happened. That's your fault. Then you learn this deep amount of distrust in yourself. And if folks will just sit for a minute, like, what does that feel like? To me, it feels like I would be on edge. I wouldn't know what's coming or going.
Yeah.
I would feel things that I wouldn't have felt otherwise if my religion wasn't gaslighting me. You're taught to distrust your gut. Authority and loyalty of the system are valued over your own truth. So it doesn't matter. Every time your gut says something's not right here, and then the religious authorities stand up and they say everything's perfectly fine, you're going to, over time, learn to distrust yourself, which again, I'm going to be apprehensive. I'm going to be skittish. I'm going to be, anytime that I feel I know something, I'm going to have self doubt about that. That's going to show up in how my body responds to any moment that looks like that.
Yeah.
Um,
This causes a disconnection between your brain and body too, by the way. Like this is part of what forms that disconnect between being able to perceive what's happening in your body in a healthy, normal way. And as you're talking about all of that, it reminds me of being in an abusive relationship with someone with high narcissism traits. The gaslighting, you bring up something and they shoot it down and you learn to disconnect from your own truth. And it has a huge impact on your nervous system, on your sense of safety, your sense of self, because you were constantly putting that person and the relationship above your own felt sense knowing, above your own internal truth. And it's very, very destructive.
yeah, I'll just note, if your system keeps changing the rules, if
Mhm.
they keep you off balance, of course you're going to feel things. And if it does harm, so one thing I note in the system that you and I both came from, that system had never has and never is going to teach healthy uh, perspectives of consent. And in fact, it's going to constantly throw you into situations that are non consensual. So I'll give examples. In our religion that we came from, we are asked to take on certain responsibilities. We're extended a calling. And that sounds like, to an outsider, that sounds like, oh, okay, you're given a responsibility. You can say yes, you can say no. Except in our religion, Mormonism, it is told to you over and over and over again that you're not really supposed to say no to a calling. So when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, would you mind being," and they don't say it that way. When they come to you and say, "God has we've prayed and God has told us that you're to be the next,"
Sunday school teacher.
yes, and it doesn't have to be something, the Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
But your problem is you hate standing in front of a group. You have
Yeah.
such a fear of that, and you don't feel comfortable that in any other situation you would be like, "No, I don't want to do that." In this situation, you are made to feel shame and guilt for saying no. You are pushed to say yes. And by doing that, you're not consenting to it. Like in
Yeah.
theory, they say you have consent, but you really don't have consent.
Well, and it reminds me too of just even being called on, to give a prayer, to give a public prayer, which was always the worst thing for me. I remember, sitting in, Sunday school or different classes, and they would I would turn my body, away, just trying to not be called on because you felt like you couldn't say no. I still said no because it was just too terrifying for me, but you see the reluctance in people when they, have to sort of do the thing.
Yeah, and there are other instances in our religion. 7-year-old kids preparing for baptism are made to go and sit down with the bishop. Bishop
Mm,
is the local leader. The parents pressure the kids to go and say there's really no other option. That's what we do. And again, it may not be said in any sort of harsh way. It might be done with smiles and soft language and kind words, but the message is clear. Before you can get baptized, and you need to get baptized, you have to sit down with this guy and you have to answer the questions that he asks. And again, you're learning that this interaction, I have to do this. I don't have the ability to consent to this. This is something I have to do.
yeah.
And when a religion does these kinds of things over and over and over again, it is now a landscape of non consensual things placed on people that their intuition about what boundaries they should have around their life are are diminished and watered down to nothing, to where you are taught that compromising yourself in ways that are unhealthy for you are always the right thing to do. And for those outside of religion, you can think of it this way. How many of you grew up in families where your parents said you had to kiss Uncle John? You had to give Aunt Jane a hug. You had to go sit on Grandpa's lap. And again, most people are healthy and they're not looking to abuse children, but some people are abusive. And often, especially in generations past, we taught our children that they don't have a say on these interactions, that it's up to the parent to determine where this goes. And so kids learn unsafe boundaries and they don't develop the ability to have their own voice about things, and hence they can end up finding themselves into abusive situations that they would have been able to stand up to or stay away from had they not been taught from early childhood that they
Yeah.
don't have a say in these things.
Yeah, that if it had been celebrated that it's their choice rather than it's the thing that you hear all the time. This is just such a common phrase in Mormonism. We're so proud that our son has decided to accept the gospel and become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. Like they say it in sacrament, and it's just ingrained into you. So it's like, oh yeah, at 8 years old, they made that choice. Isn't that great? But like they weren't really given a choice. Did we sit down and are we celebrating the kids who decided not to? Like, no, we're sort of making that the expectation. And so you're right, there is no choice around that. And it starts really, really early. And then you just keep sort of doing what you're supposed to do. Then it's the mission and then the temple marriage and all the things that follow.
And this has impacted me a lot as a grandfather. I now understand boundaries, consent, all of these things. And so if I say to one of my grandchildren, "Hey, will you give Grandpa a hug?" If they say no, I don't pout. I don't look sad. I just acknowledge that they've given me a no, and I move on. I don't pressure anything like that. If I'm tickling a grandkid, the moment they say like stop, don't do that, or they indicate in any way their body language they don't want that done, then you stop. If they come back and want to keep playing, then that's their way of giving consent and saying, "Hey, we're playing here and I want to do that." But I make it crystal clear to all of my grandkids in ways that I never did with my children, that they have autonomy and they have their voice, and they are not only safe but encouraged to use it.
Yeah.
And so I think if you can start to see how religion takes away healthy boundaries, and not only takes away healthy boundaries, but puts in place unhealthy ones, I think that's really helpful to seeing how these lines are blurred and how harm can happen. I just want to know, around 1 in 3, about 27 to 33% of US adults have experienced religious trauma at some point in their life. And as many as 15 to 20% of US adults currently suffer from religious trauma right now today. I think that's pretty significant. Examples of religious, anything you want to say about that?
No, that's staggering.
Yeah. Examples of religious trauma. We shared a few behaviors before, but we'll say a few more here. Authoritarian teachings, strict adherence to dogmatic doctrines with punitive measures for deviation. So there's an authority, because in the real world, right, you and I get together and truth is based on the merit of what's being said or taught. If you and I go to a class and the teacher says something, the internet says something else, the textbook says something else, we have some ability in ourselves to sense that, like, I got to kind of figure out who's right and who's wrong, and I got to trust the merit of what I'm looking into. But when you go to church, especially in a high demand fundamentalist religion, there is a person or group of people and they are in charge. They speak for God. And the authorities determine what is going to be right and wrong solely based on their having authority rather than the merit of whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And then there's these punishments in place for any sort of deviation from that. All right, so fear of divine punishment, instilling anxiety and guilt through the threat of eternal damnation. So you were talking before about how having 3 kingdoms and outer darkness was actually worse than having just a heaven and a hell, because now there was all this more complicated mess about where you go and how you get there, and it seems so much more gray area that determines whether you make it or you don't, and hence you have a lot more fear about what happens or about your own the salvation of your own soul.
Yeah.
Um, Ostracism for nonconformity. So if you're a doubter, you're a questioner, you don't live the laws that the authority has laid out. There is ostracism for not conforming to the system and not getting in line with its leaders. There are traumatizing rituals,
Mm.
participation in rituals or practices causing emotional distress. This didn't come from a Mormon website. This is just religious trauma, but it immediately takes me to temple ordinances, specifically older generations who had to do signs of penalties threatening to take their own life if they disclosed the teachings that were in that session, in that ritual.
Yeah.
So
I didn't
traumatized.
even like I didn't even like baptisms for the dead. I went one time, got all totally creeped out, and I never went back again. But had I come from a very active family and I had been forced into doing that, that would have been really horrible. At least my parents weren't pushing me to do it, but I really hated it.
Crisis of faith, internal conflict, doubt, and questioning one's religious beliefs. I think of the Dark Night of the Soul. That if we trained people in every religious system that this was normal, that for you to come to a different place cognitively, and that causes you to shift in how you believe and how you interpret your beliefs and how you look at the system and how you look at the authorities, and you're welcome to continually question and shift, and we don't expect you to stay in the same place. We expect you to move through these stages of development, then this would be no big deal. But because it feels like everything, including your soul, is riding on this process and nobody makes it safe to go through it, there is all this pressure on you when it happens. Spiritual abuse, so
Yeah.
manipulation, coercion, emotional blackmail by religious leaders.
Can I say
Uh,
something about that?
Please.
I was thinking about this when you brought that up before, and spiritual abuse to me is really it's an example of taking the Lord's name in vain. So when somebody uses God's name to justify something they're doing or to harm another person, and they justify it through God's name, God called me to do this or whatever. That is actually what taking the Lord's name in vain is. And as Mormons, everybody's always thought it's when you say like, "Oh God," or whatever, like if you use the word God. So I think it's really funny, but it is one of the first, isn't it like the first commandment or something in the Bible? I just find that interesting. I think that a lot of people miss that, but that's what I think of when I think of spiritual abuse.
Yeah, in Mormonism, we have an apostle, Elder Dallin Oaks. By the way, again, most people will know this already, but there's a small portion of our audience who were never Mormon. And I'll just say that I'm not LDS anymore. I've been excommunicated for publishing content that tried to expose things in the church. I think you're probably still on the rolls, but you're not a believer or active anymore. I only know that Mormonism has a leader, Dallin Oaks, who says it's wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true. Now, can you imagine, again, in the world, anytime we have constructive criticism of anything happening, or we want to establish boundaries about what is right and what is wrong, we want to step away from somebody wanting to do things that would cause harm to us. What Mormonism says is solely because of the authority of that person's office, it is not appropriate to extend any criticism.
Mhm.
That
seems
is
dangerous.
so unhealthy.
Yeah, it is.
Suppression of critical thinking. I'll run through the rest of these. Suppression of critical thinking, shaming practices, judgment and exclusion, isolation and alienation. These are the things that religion does to us. And here's what I want to drive home with this. Anybody listening who's been in unhealthy religions or has dealt with unhealthy religious aspects understands that these are the things that religions do. Specifically, these are the things that high demand, fundamentalist, unhealthy religions do.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to ask is, what does that cause in the people that it does these things to? And it's the same kinds of experiences: anxiety, pain, fear, intrusive thoughts, sickness, and I'm sure there's a whole host of others, but those are the ones I could quickly think of that I made notes of. Your body, again, I had times where I left church where the truth didn't matter. It was about authority. It was about not questioning. It was about all of us agreeing, all of us collectively hallucinating that this thing is true in a certain way. And my inability to join the group in that collective hallucination, I would leave church with my hand shaking. I only ask folks to just sit for a moment and try to sense into what it meant for your spiritual or religious systems to have harmed you, and how does that impact you today? How did it impact you then when it happened? How did it impact you all along the way? Because those are the things that show up that almost certainly in some way, shape, or form are keeping you from living your best life. And the first step in moving through these is to just notice them, to have some curiosity about them. Anything you want to say about religious trauma here?
Just repeating what we said before, that especially high demand fundamentalist institutions set you up to disconnect you from yourself. They set you up to bypass your body, your truth and your knowing, and that primes you to have a whole host of physiological manifestations and expressions in your body of different symptoms, of different pain, whatever it is. And so that's the thing I'm sort of asking people to get curious about, because we have for the longest time been, we think like, oh, our body is a physical thing and our mind is a mental thing, and they're disconnected. In this episode, what I want you to understand is that there's a mind body connection, and the things that we experience that affect us emotionally, mentally, relationally have an impact on the body. And so that's what we're kind of trying to show through this.
In the next slide, it'll show some of the symptoms of religious trauma. Not all of them. We could list probably 100 easily. But these are 7 or 8, 9 of them. But here they are. Signs of religious trauma. Perfectionism. That doesn't seem, people don't think of that as a negative symptom. But think about all the ways that perfectionism gets in the way of your relationships, you're feeling connected to yourself and others, your ability to not beat yourself up about things that don't go well. So perfectionism, self-hatred. I think of folks in the LGBT community who have harmed themselves, and some have even taken their lives, feeling because their system set an expectation for what was acceptable to God and what wasn't, that anyone who didn't fit in the box was going to have some, at a minimum, insecurity, and at a maximum, self-hatred, and a encouragement somewhere in their subconscious to carry out self-harm. Doubt, shame and guilt, sexual challenges, identity confusion, lack of boundaries, being on guard, or as you like to say, hypervigilance, mental illness. Those are just some of the things that religious trauma, religious abuse can lead to. And then common triggers that can stimulate or worsen hypervigilance, reminders of the traumatic event. I remember I have a uncle-in-law. No, let me say it different. I have a step-uncle who was in Vietnam, and loud noises would immediately send him back to feeling things that were connected to what he felt in those earlier situations in the Vietnam War. So reminders of the traumatic event, anxiety, panic, or stress, social triggers, conflict, nightmares about the traumatic event, sensory triggers, loud noises. Again, that was sort of describes him as well. Feeling trapped in a situation similar to the trauma. So those are some of the triggers. I want to note here that what we're about to get into is talking about feedback loops, or the kind of cycle that these run through. And once we notice the cycle, and especially as it's happening, we suddenly might, for the first time, have the ability to step outside of that. But is there anything you want to say in terms of triggers that can lead people to feeling things or experiencing things or reacting in certain ways?
There's just all kinds of stuff. Some of the big ones are smells, and those are really, really unconscious. We may not even know where the memory's coming from, but that was a part of my thing too. And smells and sensory stimulation can be connected to conditioned responses too. We're going to talk about that in the upcoming ones, or have we already talked about that?
No, I think the next slide here is your polyvagal ladder.
Okay.
And I think the main thing I just wanted to get across here, and I'll let you sort of speak to it, but our body and brain have normal ways that we have been programmed via evolution and survival and all those things to deal with situations that are heightened, situations that pose a threat, situations that are uncomfortable, that scare us, that I guess whatever else you want to say about it, but these are normal reactions, and they all come from different places in our brain and are adapted to handle different kinds of situations.
Yeah. And I like to call them, so these are just different nervous system states, and these are adaptations to help us survive perceived threats or real threats. And I like to really normalize this because we all have these different aspects of our nervous system that work for our highest good. And sometimes when we have, again, had trauma, we can get hijacked and we can get stuck in some of these survival nervous system states. And so it's just interesting to sort of look at them. The ventral vagal social engagement state is, from a polyvagal lens, that's the parasympathetic response. And that's when you're in rest and digest. That's when you feel open and relaxed, and you want to connect with people, and it's your safety state. And when we start to perceive that there may be danger or a threat looming, our system will go into the sympathetic or the fight or flight state. So we can either try to fight something or we can try to flee something. And it continues to sort of go down the ladder based on our ability to actually cope with whatever feels threatening or dangerous. So if we get to the place where we realize we can't fight or flee, our system may go down the ladder even more and head into what's called freeze. And that's a combination of our sympathetic state and our collapse state, which is the dorsal state. And so we can feel frozen in place. We can feel like we've got a lot of energy still in our system, and we feel like we might need to flee or fight. But there's also this part of us that feels like we can't do anything. And so we're just like a deer in the headlights. This is actually a common state that a lot of people that experience trauma live in. They have adapted to sort of be prepared to run at any given moment, but they're also having to sort of show up in society as a normal person. And so they have this break on at the same time, trying to hold all of that high activation energy sort of in check. And if we're able, if the threat or the danger is looming towards us and we have no way to fight or flee and we can't hide from it, then we go down the ladder again and we end up in the dorsal collapse state. This is where we, in a very extreme state, we might pass out, lose consciousness. That way, if an animal is eating us, you notice this when a cat has a mouse in its mouth, the mouse is limp. This is what that dorsal state is. But it can show up in less intense moments where you just feel like depression or exhausted or shut down. You have no motivation. And so that's what that state is. And it's there to protect you. It's when your system feels like so much overwhelm and it doesn't feel like it has agency to get out of the danger or to deal with whatever threat it's perceiving. So I just want to explain that. We sort of went over this in the nervous system podcast we did. But these are also just different, I don't know if you can see this very well. I probably needed to make this a little bigger, but this is what I show all my clients when I work with clients. I have a sort of a nervous system presentation where I give them an understanding of how their nervous system works, how they can tell what state that they're in, because we can learn different tools to sort of shift us out of different survival physiology or survival nervous system states. So, there's different feelings that you might notice that you have in different states. There's it shows the list of different sensations you might feel in different states. And then there's different thoughts and narratives that you might feel in different states. Our body shifts into those nervous system states unconsciously. It's not something that we try to do. It just happens. It's just responding to our environment, or it's responding to another person and their nervous system, or it's responding to our own felt senses. If we notice something is difficult or painful in our body, then we might ramp up into like a fight or flight state because that sensation is worrying, or we might feel like it's, cause for something really serious. So So these states happen without our conscious awareness. And then what's interesting about that is that your state creates your story. So your state can create your thoughts and your narrative. So if you are often stuck in a sympathetic fight or flight state because you've had a lot of stress or a lot of trauma, you will suddenly have thoughts that have the same flavor of that state. So, it might be like, oh my gosh, I've got to fix this. You're always on edge and your thoughts are just kind of spinning and running. And when you get into the freeze state, your thoughts are going to be like, I must, but I can't. I've got to do this, but there's no way I can do it. It's like this urgency mixed with like a complete shutdown. And then when you get into the dorsal state, it's like, I don't care. Like I feel apathy towards everything. It doesn't matter. I'm everything's hopeless. It's kind of like that. So there are just different ways that you can sort of, check the temperature and read your own nervous system, because the more you're able to understand your nervous system, the more skills you can develop to kind of work with it.
Perfect. And then the next one here is to start talking about this cycle or feedback loop that we run into. And again, we've talked about it earlier. You mentioned this, that fear is sort of the word that gets used a lot. But once you, as you just pointed out in the last two slides, once you understand that these are normal, evolutionarily programmed mechanisms by which we react to situations in our environment that our brain picks up as a threat or discomfort or something that we need to be aware of and deal with. It's telling our body and our brain to kick into a certain gear to handle that. And so rather than use the word fear, hypervigilance, which is the word that's used in this loop, but I'll just note here. So a physical sensation, a thought, an image perceived as threatening, that leads to us immediately starting to feel some sense of anxiety. Physical sensations, rapid heartbeat, chest pain, difficulty breathing. It can be any of those list of symptoms that we talked about earlier. Catastrophic interpretation of the physical symptoms. So again, if our brain is got some miscued signals happening, our brain might overestimate what the danger is. So for instance, the police car behind us in the mirror, when it's not doing anything other than some cops driving behind us. The amplification of physical sensations and anxiety, which leads to hypervigilance, which only reinforces this whole circle, this whole loop again the next go around.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say about how this loop can have us little by little just get further and further off track from what a healthy reaction, what a healthy framing might be for the things that we're feeling or thinking?
I mean, it's just a stuck cycle. You get stuck in it and you can't get out of it. And it just gets faster and faster and faster until you feel like you have no agency. I wanna show the next slide, which is this is my thing. And again, some of these things are too small to read, but I want to talk about how symptoms get turned on in the body. It's similar to that other loop, but this is tying it into, again, these physiological manifestations of symptoms, which a lot of people think are very disconnected, right? They think like, oh, it's my physical body, there's something wrong in it, therefore that's why I'm having these symptoms. But I want to talk about and connect the dots for you on how your brain can turn on these symptoms even when there's no physiological or structural cause. So we have this thing called neuroception, and that's where our nervous system is always scanning. It's beyond our conscious awareness. It's just happening all the time. And the nervous system will be scanning internally. It's always scanning like the sensations in the body. It's always scanning our environment. And it's always scanning from one nervous system to another. And its job is to try and to determine if this person is safe, if the environment is safe, or if our body is safe. And so all of those signals get sent up to the brain, and the brain is the one that makes the determination of whether or not the signal is safe or if it's dangerous. And if you have lived again through trauma, you've been conditioned to disconnect from your own felt sense. You don't know how to determine, what your body is telling you. You are more likely to be in hypervigilance or to have what I call a hypersensitized brain. And that hypersensitized brain is going to be more likely to make a mistake. It's going to err on the side of caution. And so when, those signals from the body come up to the brain for interpretation, it's going to be more likely to label that as, oh my gosh, there's a threat, there's danger, there's something going on. We've got to turn on a danger signal. This is what Alan Gordon terms this. He calls this, when your brain detects something that feels threatening, he calls it turning on a danger signal. So the danger signal can be anything from pain, inflammation, immune responses, dizziness, IBS, fatigue is a huge one. So many people have fatigue, and that's actually turned on by your brain. Anxiety, depression, palpitations, trembling, brain fog is a big one for a lot of people now. Muscle tightness, muscle spasms, numbness, vibrations, histamine reactions, POTS, vertigo, sweating, and then hypersensitivities. And hypersensitivities can be anything from smells. I know a lot of people are hypersensitive to perfumes. I have been for a long time. That's getting a lot better for me. But lights, sound, temperatures, being touched. Some people can't handle, being touched because their skin can be hypersensitized. And even chemicals and electromagnetic frequencies. For a long time during my illness, I couldn't get near a computer. I couldn't look at my phone without blacking out. It was really bad. So I had a lot of those sensitivities. So what happens is, your brain detects that something's dangerous, or your brain makes the call that whatever it's perceiving from the nervous system is a danger signal. And then it turns on a symptom. And then any normal person, when they have a symptom like this, is going to think like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? There's something wrong with my body. They're going to respond with maybe a little bit of fear, with a little bit of frustration. They're going to want to fix it. They're going to want to go to the doctor and figure out what's wrong with them. And maybe even resistance. And if this is like a chronic condition, if you've had these symptoms for a long time and you already have gone to the doctor and they've basically said there's nothing wrong with you, we can't figure out what's causing this, then you're going to be in the place where you're frustrated and you're overwhelmed. And basically that response just reinforces to the brain that there's something wrong. So it just keeps going round and round and round. So you just continue to have these, danger detected symptoms and then the reaction. And so the next slide, I want to talk about how you interrupt this cycle. This is the whole point of this mind-body connection piece, is to talk about, like, that's what happens, and that's a normal response to what's happening in your brain and body. But there is a way to repattern this response. There's a way to sort of get these symptoms to turn off, to get the message back to your brain that, like, oops, that was an error. There's not actually anything serious going on. There's not a structural issue here. So go through the same cycle, right? You have your symptoms, and this is where this mindfulness comes in. And again, I've said this so many times because I used to hear the word mindfulness and think it's so hokey. Like, that's just a stupid little thing. Like, what, you just are mindful of something? I just didn't get it. And I read Alan Gordon's book, and I took the course. I'm trained in pain reprocessing therapy. And that's when I really understood the power of mindfulness. It's the most powerful tool on the planet for just about anything. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with an emotional issue or if you're dealing with a physiological issue. It can transform how you perceive and experience something. So mindfulness comes in here. And Alan Gordon talks about, once you have the psychoeducation and you understand what's really happening, you can start to look at your symptoms a little bit differently. You can start to realize, like, wow, okay, I've gone to all the doctors. They've ruled out anything serious. I can't explain this any other way. This is probably my brain turning this on. And that gives you a little bit more of a pause, I guess. You can kind of start recognizing that, like, I'm going to be curious about this now. Maybe I don't have to make a judgment that there's something physically wrong with my body. So you then go into your body and you start to see those symptoms through this lens of safety, because you realize, wow, nothing physically wrong is happening. What if I'm just curious about this? What if I can just, be present with my symptoms without judging them, without labeling them as something really negative or bad or wrong? Maybe I can be even a little bit light about it. Maybe I can bring in some humor with this, because it's kind of interesting, right? That my brain is doing this thing, and what a funny thing it's doing. And I also encourage people to just be fascinated by it. Like, it's fascinating to me that the brain can turn on all these symptoms. That's just wild to me. So when we do that, when we have this ability to sort of sit with our symptoms in that way, and we have the other important tool with this work is the concept of outcome independence. So when we do this, we are not trying to make the symptom go away. We're not trying to turn off the pain signal. We are just watching it. We're just literally watching it, as if we were watching clouds pass by in the sky. And That's the key element. And so when we do that, what happens is we interrupt the cycle and the brain gets a new message. And the new message is like, all is well. There's nothing wrong here. It's okay. And the brain turns off the signal. And I have experienced this personally in real time. I had a shoulder issue that was really extremely painful. And I was convinced that it was something physiological because it hurt and it felt like, like my tendon was being ripped off of my bone. And then I kind of came into Alan's work and thought, oh, well, this shoulder thing's been bothering me for a while. I'll see if it works. And I utilized the somatic tracking on it. And within 5 minutes, it was 70% improved. And over the next 3 weeks, it completely disappeared. And that just blew my mind. But I had, this really cool experience of this happening in real time. And that's what really sold me on it. And then I've used it for many other symptoms since then. And I've used it with clients and had huge success. And it's so incredibly powerful. So I, wanted to illustrate, how the thing gets turned on and how it gets turned off. And there's other elements to this, when we're doing different processes like pain reprocessing therapy or nervous system regulation tools. But this is a big foundational piece.
I love it. So I want to reinforce this a little bit. I'll just note here again, it says signs of fear, but signs of hypervigilance, sweating, shortness of breath, feeling out of control, dizziness, feeling overwhelmed, nausea, chills, rapid heart rate. These are some of the simple ones. You were talking about more complicated or more, maybe more serious symptoms. And I showed a big chart or a graphic earlier that just listed lots of them, maybe 100 symptoms on the image. So I'll just note that, again, these are things that we feel, think, experience that aren't positive, and they're holding us back from living our best life. Now I want to stay on this screen. These two studies show us why this cycle or loop happens. On the left, prefrontal engrams of long-term fear memory perpetuate pain perception. In other words, your fears and memories of those fears add to and perpetuate your perception of pain. Then on the other side, it's the opposite. Persistent pain intensifies recall of consolidated fear memories. So you feel a symptom, you experience a feeling that's tied to your thoughts around it, and it magnifies the other. And then when you do the other side of the coin, it magnifies the symptoms. And so you can end up in this cycle where I feel something, I'm scared about what that means. So now I notice I feel it more. So now I'm more scared about what it means. So now I feel it more. So now I'm more scared about what it means. And before long, your brain has been tricked through a continuous pattern that's escalated into now you are debilitated. You are unable to function, and everything is seems like a symptom of whatever is going on. Like your life is full of this going on, either by the number of things that you're experiencing or by the magnitude of those symptoms. And there was another spot in the book, The Way Out by Alan Gordon. I want to make sure I read it here. The people who have more fear registering in their brain responses are more likely to have the symptoms last beyond the point of the body healing. In other words, they've done studies on people's brains in the middle of injuries and other sort of things that have happened to people that have their bodies being broken down or some sort of ailment or injury. And the folks who felt the most fear around their injury were most likely to have symptoms of that pain, of that injury.
Chronic
Say that again?
Yeah, but they end up having chronic pain.
They end up having pain last beyond the healing. The body heals, The people who don't have a bunch of fear responses around it just healed and they moved on and they were fine again and they just went back to life. The people who felt immense amounts of fear were more likely to continue feeling some sort of effects of the injury long past the moment when it should have been healed completely.
Yeah. And what's important to talk about here too is the fact that acute pain and chronic pain are totally different. Acute pain and chronic pain show up in the brain differently, and chronic pain is a learned response. So it actually shows up in the part of the brain where memory and learning are show up. So it's literally a learned conditioned response, which I think is fascinating. So when people understand, like if they've had this pain forever and they had an injury and then the injury, should have healed, because guess what? The body does heal. Like it really does. But sometimes after it should have healed, the brain has learned a pain response. So it's not that the body is still injured. Maybe you've got scar tissue or maybe you've got different things. But if the body's no longer in danger of being injured further, there's absolutely no reason for your brain to turn on a pain signal. You don't need that pain signal anymore. And because the whole reason for the pain signal is to get you to, be immobilized so your body can rest and heal. Now, once your body has rested and healed, there's no need to be immobilized anymore. So that becomes a learned pattern or a learned response that you can then turn off. So it's important for people to know that, because sometimes I think like, oh, it's just, I just have to live with this. It's just the way things are. But no, it's not the way things have to be. Maybe there's a way to turn that off so that you can have more freedom in your life.
Yeah. And so now we move into part of the conversation here where we can talk to the benefits of having help in these things. And so this first slide, how to support someone who has experienced trauma. Uh, these are the things that help provides. Help provides predictability. So people learn to sort out what real threats are and what non-threats are. There's space, so there's safe space to work all this out. One doesn't need to feel the pressure. They can just take some time and calm down and really feel into their body and what's going on and not feel like something's going to go haywire if they don't respond quickly. Recalibration, so there's opportunities to recalibrate, to reflect, and to think on what it is that's happening, and to find ways to make little shifts that start to make positive differences. They get support, they get choice, so they have their ability to choose how things unfold, what they will take on. It's so much different than living in the real world where things constantly keep coming, and you got to constantly keep uh, doing things to stay ahead of what's happening in our world. So uh, attribution, reciprocity. So they're again, this one here says, give what you also need to receive, listening, empathy, empowerment. So these are the things that are signs of one being in a space where help is being provided. Now, one way that can happen is a coach or a therapist. So we note that. One of the other studies that caught my eye is retraining the brain to treat chronic pain. And this is what you just said just a few moments ago. But here's what it says in the study. It says, for a long time, we have thought that chronic pain is due primarily to problems in the body. And most treatments to date have targeted that. And that's the person in the study, Asher says. So, and then they went on. This treatment is based on the premise that the brain can generate pain in the absence of injury or after an injury has healed. And we've been talking about that all episode.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. And that people can unlearn that pain. Our study shows it works. So peer-reviewed research demonstrates that what you've been saying, Teresa, it holds up to be true. People can, with the right kinds of help in coaching or therapy, they can address the mind-body interactions going on, and they can reprocess what those signals are, what those mean, and what needs to happen when they're triggered.
Yes. And one thing I want to say here too is it's so cool because this information it's slow in coming, but it's becoming more widespread and more well known within medical circles. So typically you'd go to the doctor and if you have a chronic pain condition or a chronic symptom, doctors do not know how to deal with patients like this. They don't have anything for them. And so sometimes a doctor will feel so much pressure to give you a diagnosis or to do something to help you, and they'll look for anything they can find, and they'll say, "Oh, well, here it is. You've got this." And then you get a label, and that's very helpful because at least it feels like it's justified something that's going on with you. Now you know, okay, there's something real happening. But on some level, that also keeps you stuck, because if you now have this label that there's a physiological thing, then it's harder for you to retrain that. So as this information becomes more well known and more widespread, I feel like this is going to make its way into primary care physicians. This is going to, like, 40% of primary care visits are due to stress related conditions that doctors can't really help you with. I can tell that many doctors are frustrated because they don't know how to help their patients and they desperately want to. So it's exciting to me that this is an NIH study, that this, pain reprocessing therapy was highlighted on NPR a few months ago. I've had clients reach out to me because they heard about it there. So I feel like the model of like the medical field is going to shift to where it can start directing people to things that are actually going to help them with a lot of these chronic conditions. And that to me is like so incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it's thrilling. I'll just note here, these were some of the books that you have suggested both to me, and I think it'd be fair to say that these would be suggestible to the audience. But I do want you to just know what you see maybe is which ones of these are of most value in your mind, and maybe help us understand the progression of who came out with ideas and who's improved upon those and how that's all unfolded.
Yeah, so these are all great books. John Sarno is like the grandfather of all this storage stuff. He was working with people with chronic pain for, decades and decades ago. And so a lot of people have sort of learned from him, and then they've brought in their own newer aspects. What I love, the best book on here, if you were going to read any of these books, I would recommend The Way Out by Alan Gordon. It's the most up to date, and Alan has basically taken the physical side, which has been validated by physical medicine, and he has brought in, because he's a psychotherapist, so he's brought in the mind side. And Dr. Sarno was an MD, and he was awesome and wonderful, but he he wasn't as skilled with the mind stuff. So his he helped a lot of people, but the way he sort of framed this, his framework around the mind body connection, was a little kind of vague. It was harder to understand. And so I think Alan does an incredible job of translating that information in a way that's understandable, and he gives you really, really amazing skills to sort of start addressing it. And what I would say, if you're going to be reading The Way Out and you have a symptom that's different than just pain, because he speaks to pain in that book. A lot of the studies they've done on chronic pain, but this crosses over into so many different symptoms. And so I use this approach for many people who come to me with chronic fatigue syndrome, with all kinds of strange invisible illnesses like Lyme disease or long COVID, things like that, where you have all kinds of crazy symptoms going on in the body and you cannot figure out what's causing it. So a lot of multi-symptom stuff. But if you just replace your symptom with the word pain, whenever Alan Gordon says that, you'll understand that there's the same mind-body connection going on. It's the same process. So what's another? So there's another man. His name is Dr. Howard Schubiner. We don't have any of his books on here, but he's written a lot of really great books on the mind-body connection. And we will list some links and resources in the description of this episode where people can go to just get validated by, I think it's really cool when doctors come on board with this stuff, because I feel like they offer, what's the word I'm looking for? They legitimize it, when they understand this, and they're basically pointing to scientific studies. It legitimizes that this is a real thing, because this is not an easy thing for people to buy into. It took me years and years before I recognized and realized, like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening to me. So if there's resistance, or you're feeling like, oh, that's not my story, that's okay. You can sort of explore some of these resources until it starts to really click and make sense that, like, wow, this is a real thing, because it really is. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I'll just note, if I go back a couple here, as you were talking about this pattern and interrupting it, it's when we go back to the very beginning of our conversation, this Whiplash study in Lithuania versus the United States, it's collectively this, again, social contagion, but it's collectively this expectation that something will exist far past when it might have healed. The way that this got addressed was a mind-body issue. The way it got addressed was being in a completely separate environment where there was no expectation of whiplash lasting beyond a normal frame of healing, and everybody just expected to get better, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And so when we get forward here now, just to know, I don't want that one. Let me grab the other one here. Slideshow, add this one on. So going back to what we were saying in the beginning, or earlier, so much of this conversation revolved around pain. But as you pointed out, this isn't just pain. Maybe you have high levels of anxiety that inhibit you from living your best life. Maybe it's pain. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's intrusive thoughts. Maybe it's sickness of one sort or another. Maybe it's chronic fatigue. It could be a whole lot of other things too. Whatever's happened to you before, it's happened. And your mind is triggered by certain things. Your body's triggered by certain things. You have this mind-body connection that then delivers these symptoms, delivers these reactionary states in us. And all, again, for the folks who go, I'm living my best life and I don't experience any of this. Perfect. For those who do, this is who the conversation is for. If you are experiencing things in your mind or in your body that are inhibiting you from living your best life, and you don't have a plan given to you by a medical professional, given to you by somebody who can help you take a medicine and that takes care of the problem, or if you do this exercise, it takes care of the problem, or I see a therapist and I see, then I would consider that if you've tried other things and you can't figure out a way to get through these reactions to get to a place where they don't happen, or they are being diminished and the intensity of them is being brought down, then you have an opportunity here to have a different way to see if it can help. We talked about the signs of religious trauma. Again, these are just some of them. But if folks have been traumatized by their religion, and the way their brain, the way their mind and body respond to that trauma is inhibiting them from living their best life, then I'm suggesting here's a chance to try something to maybe do something about it. If these cycles happen and you're just caught in these loops and you need help getting out of them, here's a chance to see if something can be done about that. Right? Here's all of these symptoms we talked about. Again, the phrase anxiety symptoms isn't the best, but these symptoms are real. And lots of us out there feel these things. I know that in moments where I have the world show up in a certain way and I'm triggered, I end up with some of these. Numbness is one that I get if things are really emotionally heightened. I can feel that, a racing heart, knot in the stomach, difficulty breathing. Anyway, some of these are minor, and maybe we just live every day and they're no big deal. But some of these are, chronic fatigue, migraine headaches, feeling like you're going to pass out, a racing heart. Some of these are serious enough that they are keeping you from living your best life. And I just don't think that should be minimized. And so anything else you want to say? I did want to put your website up too and just give people a chance to see that as well. Anything you want to say about your site if people do want some help? Anything else you want to say about the conversation that we had today?
Just that, again, it's something that not a lot of people know about, not a lot of people talk about, and so many people. And I've had this conversation recently with some people that have recently reached out to me who come from an LDS background, and we're dealing with all these symptoms, and they say like, and this is one of the things about Mormonism too that I'll just say is we don't want other people to see our pain. We don't want other people to see us not in our most perfect presentation, right? That's part of what Mormonism does to people. There's that so many women especially have that level of perfectionism. And so most people in their lives don't know that they're going through this stuff. They don't know that they battle with this stuff because they only show up when they're having a good day. And a lot of people feel a lot of shame about having chronic symptoms that debilitate them. And, so they hide it. And so I just want you to know that if this is something you deal with, that you're not alone, that this is more common than you would ever imagine, that in many cases there are ways to uh, shift this and start changing towards having more and more better days, to being able to feel like you have more capacity to be in control of your life and more confidence in how you work with your body and your symptoms. And so the work that I do with people is multifaceted. I work with people on helping them understand how to decrease their overall stress load. We find ways to sort of drain their overwhelm bucket. So anything in their life that it is considered a stress that's piling up in this giant bucket that overflows and causes more and more stress and more hypersensitivity and hypervigilance. We work on how to sort of diminish that. And then I teach people, the psychoeducation piece so that they really, really get it and understand it and are able to learn how to turn off those symptom signals, whether it's pain or other debilitating symptoms. And there's just so many different things. One of the things that you addressed in the spiritual trauma thing was boundaries, like lack of boundaries. And that in and of itself is like, I have certain people that I work with only on boundaries, trying to figure out how to be able to say no to things and how to be able to trust that, like, oh, this is a no for me and I can say no. Because one of the books that you brought up or they showed on there is this book called When the Body Says No. That's by Gabor Mate. And that comes from, he talks a lot about how one of the body's ways of sort of responding to, like say there somebody crosses a boundary and you just bypass it because you're taught that in your religion or whatever, then your body may try to get your attention by turning on a symptom to say, like, no, that's not in alignment with what my truth is or what I really want. And you just keep trying to like disconnect from yourself, and that symptom gets louder and louder and louder because the body is screaming, trying to get your attention, saying something's wrong. And so some of the work I do with people is just simply teaching them how to feel safe, setting boundaries and saying no, so that their body doesn't have to set it for them. I know a lot of people, I have tons of clients who, they're not able to say no. And the only way that they can get out of doing something is if their body has a flare up, if it debilitates them in some place or they have like a migraine headache that comes on because they couldn't say no to the event or the person who asked them to do the thing. The body did it for them. And, I would just rather have somebody be able to say, no problem. And they can go and enjoy themselves in some other way than have to sit out the night having a horrible migraine headache. So these are the different things that I sort of work with people on. And it's case by case basis. Everybody has different reasons why they have different drivers of this. They have different condition responses when it comes to their symptoms. They have different trauma histories. And I just sort of sit with people and figure out, it's kind of like almost like a role of detective. Like you sit with a person and you try to figure out, like, what are all your pieces of this? What are all the pieces of the puzzle for you? And what do you need the most support in so that you can learn to turn off these triggers in your system and you can have a more open and enjoyable life. And it's an ongoing process for me too, as anyone who's watched my episode on my own experience, I am continuing to learn to expand in my own life and see how far I can go. And that's just really exciting to me. And I feel really rewarded to be able to work with people and see people change and grow and shift out of protective patterns into more connection. And that's essentially what I do.
Yeah. And I just want to note, I want to put the site back up again. So if folks do notice these things going on in their life and they do want some help, Teresa, your website is Monarch Integrative Coaching, and folks can go there and schedule an opportunity to chat with you. And then we'll have other things coming up in the future. You and I have talked about trying to put a group together to be
Yeah.
more hands-on with religious trauma as well. And so,
Yeah. And I wanna mention, I do have a free support group. I don't know why I always forget this, but if you on my website, if you go to the group section, you can sign up, and there's a group that meets every other Thursday, so my Circle of Connection groups, and this is free of charge. This is just a support group for people who may have, like, debilitating chronic illnesses or whatever, and they've never felt like it's safe to show up as themselves. We just sort of we talk about different strategies or different coping ways that we cope, and sometimes I offer a little bit of psychoeducation in these, but for the most part, it's just a space where people can feel seen and heard. And then in addition, I have a YouTube channel, and I have some different resources on there and tools. I have different guided meditations and that kind of demonstrates what somatic tracking is. So that can be helpful for people if they've read The Way Out and they want to have a little bit more tools to use. And there's different, things that I will occasionally throw on there just to kind of give people some free resources, because this is a hard thing to navigate. So that's that.
yeah, I just want to note, sort of wrapping up, I have wanted to, for the 12 years that I've been doing this work, I've wanted to try to make this community have more resources, have more information. And I fully realize that people have been deeply hurt, whether it's by religion or whether it's by other things. And we've talked about some of those today. But regardless of whatever the cause is of you not being able to live your best life, the Almost Awakened podcast, the purpose of this show in particular was to give people who had deconstructed religion, gotten to the other side of that. They no longer needed the religious issues explained again. They had made peace with that, and they had stepped away from the faith and were trying to live their best life, was to give them the resources and tools to enable them to do that. And helping people who are experiencing the negative repercussions of the trauma that's happened to them is a big part of that. And so I'm really glad to team up with you and to be offering people conversations. And we won't always be talking about this. This has been a conversation we've had several times now, trying to help people understand the connection of why their system reacts the way it does, to notice the traumas that have happened to them, to pick out how that's inhibiting them today, and to give them the resources and tools. But we'll start diving into other conversations and topics here shortly, including, I believe the next episode will be one of those. But anything else you want to say? Otherwise, I think we've covered it all, and I really appreciate everything you brought to the table today, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to share this. And yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation. So I hope everyone else gets something from it, whether they're going through something themselves or whether they see this in someone else that they love. So if you know someone who's dealing with this, please share this episode with them.
Yeah. Yeah. If you know someone who's dealing with these kinds of things, share this episode with them. Thank you. And folks, we'll be back for the next episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. Hope that each of you have a great day, and I hope that these kinds of insights and conversations are helpful to you. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up